All right, this is part two of our discussion on the Declaration of Independence. So, for those of you guys who've never actually read through the grievances, it's good, once in a blue moon to read through. Most of us, when we look at that list of 27 grievances, we go like, oh my gosh, and just move on to the resolution at the end of the declaration. But once in a while, it is good to read through and go like, this is what had made our founding fathers believe that England had broken its social contract and was not protecting the natural rights of the American citizens. So now I am going to read through the grievance part of the Declaration of Independence. So in the last video, we talked about the preamble and at the end, the resolution. So we've been at the beginning and the end, the introduction, the conclusion. Now we're doing the body of the essay here. All right. So grab a cup of coffee, a soda or something. It's going to take a minute. All right. So Thomas Jefferson and his team wrote this. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. And accordingly, all experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. You get that? All right, so it's logical. Prudence dictates this, that governments can't be just overthrown and changed for just any old little thing. And so people will suffer. They'll put up with things for a long time, even when there's some evils, as long as those evils are sufferable. But eventually, the breaking of that social contract and the lack of protecting the natural laws will cause people to stand up. So here's the next part. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations pursuing invariably the same object evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off the government and to provide new guards for their future security. So when the abuses get so bad that the king has become a despot and has taken away their rights, they have reduced them and into great suffering by these injustices, that it's time to throw off that government and form one that will provide security for them, their natural rights. Such has been the patient sufferance of the colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let the facts be submitted to a candid world. Note, please, that people did not expect a king to be a despot or a tyrant. They expected him to lead according to social contract, to protect natural rights. Instead, he was taking away the natural rights. So that is a thing to note. Like, tyrants have never been okay with the American people. All right, here are the 27 grievances. He has refused his assent to laws, the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. He was not letting them make laws, okay, and give his approval to those. He has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance unless suspended in their operation until his assent should be attained. And when so suspended, he has utterly neglected to attend to them. So they're trying to run their different colonies with the governors, with the people, with their little legislative bodies, and everything has to have his approval, or it just sits there, and he's letting things just sit there. He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people, unless those people should relinquish the right of representation in the legislature, a right inestimable to them and formidable to tyrants only. In other words, they had little legislative bodies, all right, that were trying to pass laws, that were trying to advise the governors, and he was taking away the right of those little legislative bodies in the colonies to do their work. So rather than a little glimpse at separate, bodies of government, he was squishing them and becoming a tyrant. He has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depositary of their public records for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures, making it hard for any governing to happen. He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing with manly firmness his invasions on the rights of the people. So they try to do their little legislative bodies, and he makes them stop. He has refused for a long time, after such dissolutions, to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative powers, incapable of annihilation, have returned to the people at large for their exercise, the state remaining in the meantime exposed to all the dangers of invasion from without and convulsions from within. In other words, he made it impossible for the little legislative bodies to do their job, leaving people in danger. He has endeavored to prevent the population of these states for that purpose of obstructing the laws for naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migrations hither, and raising the conditions of new appropriations of lands. So he was making it very, very difficult for people to immigrate to these United States. He did not want any more people there who wanted to complain about him. So he made it very hard for immigration. He has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers. So he squelched the courts. He has made judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their offices and the amount and payment of their salaries, again, squelching the courts. He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substances. So he is sending the military over, and the military had to be supported by the local Americans. He has kept among us in times of peace standing armies without consent of our legislators. So he sent armies to colonies without the colonies asking for those armies to be there. They did not have permission. They didn't say, we need help. Instead, he sent them to the colonies without permission. He has affected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. In other words, the military only answered to him, and so they were doing whatever they wanted in the colonies, by his will. He has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and acknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation. So he's let other people who aren't related at all to our colonies to make up rules and laws, like I'm just making this law. And so as in, the military making up a law for this or that. All right, so some of these laws that were made up not by American colonists, but by people sent by the king. So these are for quartering large bodies of armed troops among us. So they were living in the homes, especially Boston was just full of soldiers that were being quartered there. in people's homes, for protecting them by a mock trial from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states. So if they were one of the soldiers or an official from Great Britain, they could do whatever they wanted to, because these mock trials by these mock judges wouldn't even punish murder. For cutting off our trade from all parts of the world, for imposing taxes on us without our consent, taxation without representation that we all know from school, for depriving us in many cases of the benefits of a trial by jury. And you notice that's in our Constitution, right? For transporting us beyond the seas to be tried for pretended offenses. So if you made the king mad, they're going to charge you with something, or maybe not charge you with anything and arrest you and send you overseas um, for some kind of trial. For abolishing the free system of English laws in a neighboring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government, and enlarging its boundaries so as to render it at once an example and fit instrument for introducing the same absolute rule into these colonies. So he was manipulating other parts of the British Empire in ways that benefited him, to try to bring that kind of tyranny over into the States. For taking away our charters, our permission to be colonies, abolishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally our forms of government. So everything we tried to do, he was squelching. For suspending our own legislatures and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases. He has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. So, which was happening, they had already had Lexington and Concord's battles before this declaration even went out. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coast, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people, because he was already punishing the Americans, trying to squelch them. He wanted a tyranny kind of government. He is at this time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny already begun with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy, scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages, and totally unworthy of the head of a civilized nation. I think any of you guys who have, watched old Ken Burns videos on the American Revolution, you will get some of these backstories of the cruelty and perfidy of some of these mercenaries who were bringing death, desolation, and tyranny in the name of the king. He has constrained our fellow citizens, taken captive on the high seas, to bear arms against their own country, to become the executioners of their friends and brethren, or to fall themselves by their hands. So these are, if American was on a fishing boat and the British ship comes by, the citizens on that boat were made to serve in the English army. And so then they were having to bear arms against their own family, their own friends. He has excited domestic insurrections among us and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers, the merciless savage Indians, whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and condition. A rather embarrassing grievance here. So the British and the French, back in the French and Indian War, had both involved different tribes, for their cause, because the Indians were really trying to protect, their land, their people from these encroachers. So if the British were invading their lands, they helped the French. If the French were invading their lands, they helped the British. And so in doing that, the white folks were able to make the Indians the bad guys. So the Native Americans who just wanted their own safety and lands were called merciless Indian savages and insulted. So that, as you know, our founding fathers didn't have it all together, and this is not one that they had together. All right. In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. So you notice in our Bill of Rights, we have the right to petition for redress of a grievance. And that comes from, we tried to talk to the king. We would send our grievance. We would send Benjamin Franklin. We would send people over to him. And he's totally ignored and make things worse and just kept making himself more and more a tyrant. So that Bill of Rights made sure we have the freedom to petition for redress. All right. This is the last paragraph of the grievances in the Declaration of Independence. Nor have we been wanting in attentions to our British brethren. We have warned them from time to time of attempts by their legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our immigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity and have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations, which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. They too have been deaf to the voice of justice and consanguinity. We must therefore acquiesce in the necessity which denounces our separation and hold them as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war, and peace, friends. So it made the promise right there that we are separating. There's going to be a war, and you guys are going to be our enemies for right now. But when there's peace, we will be friends. So there's a promise of the future built into even the grievances, which then leads into that concluding paragraph where we reiterate our independence from Britain and pledge our life, liberty, and property, our sacred honor and fortunes to each other.